Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for today's program, How RBG Came to Be, the Process of Appointing a Supreme Court Justice. And by the way, today would be RBG's birthday. Today is her birthday, so I should have acknowledged that in the description. 20 years before she became known as RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was appointed to the United States Supreme Court by President Clinton. We'll explore the process from selection to swearing in through records held at the Clinton Presidential Library. Today's presentation is led by Kathleen Page, who was born and reared in Augusta, Georgia. She has an undergraduate degree in sociology and her certificate in women's studies from the University of Georgia. Kathleen completed a thesis on the evolution of presidential library site selection to earn her master's degree in public history from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. She began her career in museum education at the historic Arkansas Museum in 1998 and accepted her current position as education specialist at the Clinton Presidential Library back in 2002. Kathleen lives in Pine Bluff with her husband Matthew and their rescue Boston Terrier Tilly. So all of us that are watching live, I believe, let me get the latest count here. There are nearly 70 of us. Let's give a big virtual round of applause to Kathleen for joining us here today. And Kathleen, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Awesome, thank you. Now, I do want to clarify something. I'm not actually donating my time. I am a federal employee, so I work for each of you, assuming that you pay taxes. If you do not, please don't mention it. I think I'd have to report you or something. So it's not just free. This is actually prepaid. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk a little bit about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Let me pop that up big so it fills the screen. And if you do have questions, throw those in the Q&A. That's the easiest place for us to go back to them. All right, I am the education specialist at the Clinton Presidential Library, which is one of 14 libraries under the National Archives and Records Administration. And this is what the library looks like from the outside on a beautiful spring day. It's pretty nice here, although we did have snow this past weekend, so it's been kind of a weird weather situation. So the National Archives is the independent federal agency in charge of record keeping for all three branches of the federal government. And that might not sound exciting, but what the National Archives is and does is part of what makes our country a democracy. So being able to look at the records of our government allows us, the citizen, the voter, to hold our elected and appointed officials accountable. So it really is a big deal. So at the Clinton Presidential Library, we have the records from the Clinton administration. So the 8 years that President Clinton was in office, we have all of those documents, those reports, those memos, those radio addresses, video, photographs. And so that's going to be sprinkled in the presentation. Probably the most important document that the National Archives is responsible for is the United States Constitution. Now, this presentation was originally created for students, but I didn't want to take these slides out because I think it's always good to have a refresher on the three branches of government, right? Because this comes into play in the process of appointing a Supreme Court justice, right? So we've got those built-in checks and balances. So we have the legislative branch, Congress, the Senate, and the House making the laws, the executive branch, the president and executive agencies enforcing those laws, and then the judicial branch, who is determining if the laws and the way the laws are enforced match up with the Constitution. And we know that legislative branch and executive branch are elected officials, but those judicial branch are appointed, and a Supreme Court justice is appointed for life. So it's a pretty big deal to appoint a Supreme Court justice. I will say, when I created this presentation, I did not know that there would be a vacancy on the court when I was giving the presentation. So a little bit more about Article 2, the executive branch. I like to call the president's roles the 4 C's. So the president is our chief executive, he's our commander-in-chief, he's also our chief diplomat and our ceremonial head of state. Now, chief diplomat and ceremonial head of state are very similar. That's why they're listed together. When I think about the difference, it helps me to think about the Prime Minister of Great Britain and the Queen, right? So the Queen would be the ceremonial head of state and the Prime Minister would be the chief diplomat. So under chief executive, there's some specific duties, and that includes that the president shall, and with advice and consent of the Senate, appoint judges of the Supreme Court. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Now, there are several steps in the appointment of a Supreme Court justice, and it is rarely a straight linear path. Lots of curves in there. So the first thing that has to happen is a vacancy. Then vetting, the nomination, prep, hearings, the recommendation of the Senate Judiciary Committee, confirmation by the full Senate, and then the swearing in. So we're going to look at each one of those steps, but first we're going to pause. And I want you to imagine for a moment that you are president. You were sworn in on January 20th, 1993. It's less than 60 days since you took office, and you have a big day scheduled. You are going for a jog. You're going to have breakfast with some members of Congress. Then you're going to head down to Atlanta. It looks like you've got about 3 different sets of meetings. You're going to go to a child development center in downtown Atlanta. Then you're going to speak at the Apparel Mart in the Fashion Theater. And I am from Georgia, and I have no idea what the Apparel Mart is in Atlanta. I'm thinking it's, well, I don't know what it is. And then President Clinton is going to have a meeting, looks like it's a pretty short meeting about, it says Olympic meeting. I assume that's about the 1996 Olympics that were held in Atlanta. And then it's not a super long day. He's going to come back around 6:15, and he actually has the evening off. Now, what you're looking at is the president's official daily schedule for March 19th, 1993. But there was a little surprise that morning, something that President Clinton wasn't expecting. Justice Byron White announced his retirement. And he did this in an interesting way. And I had some students who were very confused about this, but he sent President Clinton, Justice White sent President Clinton a letter. Now, he didn't mail it. He actually sent it with Ron Klain. And that name may sound familiar. Ron Klain is currently President Biden's chief of staff. But he worked in the Clinton administration. Before he worked in the Clinton administration, he had been a law clerk for Justice White. And so they had breakfast, and Justice White gave Ron Klain a letter and said, please take this to your boss. So here's a little bit of background about Justice White. In his letter, he says, it's been an interesting and exciting experience, but after 31 years, Marion and I think that someone else should be permitted to have a like experience. Now, I want to point out, I don't think anyone since Justice White has had a similar experience in that he was from Colorado. He was a lawyer. He had met Kennedy pretty early on, and he helped with the Kennedy campaign in Colorado. Afterwards, Kennedy basically said, you can have your pick of positions in the administration. And so he chose to be the Deputy Attorney General. Less than a year later, President Kennedy appointed him to the Supreme Court. And after only 2 weeks of hearings, he was approved by the Senate. So a very quick confirmation process. That is no longer the case. So here is President Clinton. I think I took my circle away. Here's President Clinton in his office, 1993, really early on. You might recognize some folks in this photograph. This is Bruce Lindsay. This is George Stephanopoulos. This is, with the arms folded, this is Ron Klain. And so we're getting a little bit, yes, they're all so young. Look at President Clinton, so very young. So here you can see that President Clinton issued a statement that day on the retirement of Justice White, and said some great things about him. He's a living example of the American dream fulfilled. Interesting thing, Justice White was a professional athlete. He played football, and he had a nickname that he hated, Whizzer. Byron Whizzer White. He did not like that nickname. So based on this statement, you might think that the Clinton administration was prepared for Justice White's retirement. But I will let President Clinton tell you in his own words. So this would be, if you remember in the schedule, he's going to leave the White House, go to Marine One, take Marine One to the Air Force Base, get on Air Force One and fly down to Atlanta. So this is him, this is President Clinton interacting with the press on that walk from the White House to Marine One.
The list may get longer, may get shorter. I did not anticipate having the opportunity to make an appointment at this early stage, so we don't have a big bank of potential nominees. I'll go to work on it tomorrow. I don't want to discuss any individuals at this point. I will do my best to pick a truly outstanding person just as soon as I can.
Was liberal or conservative?
The list may get longer, but
Right. So President Clinton says, list may get longer, list may get shorter. I did not anticipate having this opportunity so early on, right? When you become president, particularly when you become president for the first term, you have a lot of appointments to make and you have a lot of decisions to make. And this is, like I say, less than 60 days since President Clinton was sworn in. So in his autobiography, he talks about reviewing 40 potential nominees before settling on his top 3. Now, number one, he really strongly considered Bruce Babbitt, who he had appointed as the Secretary of the Interior, and he decided he really needed to. All right, are y'all seeing my screen? Because it says my screen sharing is paused.
So Kathleen, right now we're still seeing the Bill Clinton C-SPAN video, the end of it there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back so you can see this instead. So now do you see my live?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I don't know why it paused my screen sharing. So President Clinton considered Bruce Babbitt, decided to leave him as Secretary of the Interior, felt like he would do a good job. He'd already been confirmed. So he moved on to looking at 2 judges who were already working in federal courts, Court of Appeals, Justice Stephen Breyer, who was in Boston, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was in the District of Columbia. So President Clinton had interviews with the first 2 candidates, and the press was aware of these interviews. And so when he decided to meet with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, he actually had her come to the White House on a Sunday. hopeful that the press would not be aware that she was coming. All right, let's talk a little bit about the vetting process. So this is a record from our archives at the Clinton Library, and it is a 2-page document. The first page is this fact sheet, and they list it kind of most important to least important in terms of appointing a Supreme Court justice. So at the very top, we see judicial record. Then we learn about her career, both as a lawyer and a law professor. And you can see that part about personal history is very short, very short. So this is just a 1-page summary of her. So let's talk about that personal life. So she was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1933. And we know that that was March 15th, today is her birthday. She was one of 2 children. And her mother passed right before she graduated from high school. So I mention this because she talks about her mother when she is nominated. There's a ceremony in the Rose Garden. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but she talks about her mother then. So we can see even as a teenager in this sassy suit and sweet shoes that she is comfortable with public speaking. And I love the kind of childhood photo with that lovely hairdo and that hand on the hip. All right, so Ruth Bader Ginsburg got her undergraduate degree in government at Cornell, which is where she met her future husband. We'll talk about him in just a minute. She attended Harvard Law, one of 9 women in a class of 500. Again, students had a lot of questions about this because they couldn't imagine a time where women were not represented in higher education. She transferred to Columbia Law for her final year. She graduated in 1959, tied for first in her class. All right, so she did meet Martin Ginsburg at Cornell, and they were married in 1954. He got a job. He attended Harvard. He was a year ahead of her. He got a job in New York, which is why she transferred to Columbia. They have 2 children, Jane, who was born in 1955, and James, who was born 10 years later in 1965. Now, Marty Ginsburg actually fell ill when he was attending law school, and Ruth went to his classes, took notes, and helped him finish his law degree. They have a great partnership. All right, so here is a career timeline for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Once she finishes law school, she serves as a clerk in the district court, U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. She is then a research associate director at Columbia Law. Then she takes a job at Rutgers. She's there for several years, and then she becomes a professor of law at Columbia. Interesting thing about that, when she is hired at Columbia, she is the first female faculty for the law school there at Columbia. She's on the board of editors for the American Bar Association. She also later serves on the board and executive committee of the American Bar Foundation, and later the Council of American Law Institute. So those gray squares were looking at service that she did in her career. But the red arrows in the middle are very important to thinking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg as RBG. She co-founded the Women's Rights Project of the ACLU, and she served as the ACLU's general counsel. Very important to her. And then that last dark blue, we kind of see her career come full circle. She is appointed as a judge for the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. All right, so you see here the newspaper from her appointment at Columbia, where she is the first woman member of the law faculty. And she teaches a landmark course in sex discrimination. And it's interesting because she's teaching this class, but she is also working with the ACLU, and she's working to fight sex discrimination or gender discrimination. Right? So this is something that she is passionate about, and she is good at it. She argues 6 cases before the Supreme Court and wins 5 of those. So this is the second half of the 2-page document, right? The first page was her fact sheet. The second page was about her as a lawyer. This statement, I think, is incredibly telling. Ruth Bader Ginsburg briefed or argued virtually every major sex discrimination case before the Supreme Court in the 1970s. It is for this reason that she is often called the, quote, Thurgood Marshall of the women's movement, which I really can't imagine a higher compliment to be compared to Thurgood Marshall. So I want to break down the 5 cases that she won. 2 of them are interesting because the plaintiff was actually a man and not a woman. So the 2 cases that you see on the bottom of your screen here, these are cases when husband and wife, the wife passes away, and the husband does not get the same benefits, the same Social Security benefits that a widow would have gotten. Right? And it has everything to do with gender discrimination, sex discrimination, the idea that the man would be the primary breadwinner and that a woman whose husband died would need additional support. And so those two cases, 75 and 77, the Supreme Court rules it is unconstitutional to discriminate in that way. One of her first cases, 1973, was about equal housing benefits, healthcare benefits for women serving in the armed forces. They were not getting equal benefits to men. And then there are 2 other cases that are about jury duty, right? Women were not serving on juries. Women could certainly be charged with crimes, be prosecuted for crimes, but the Constitution says we have a right to a jury of our peers. So if it's an all-male jury and I am a woman who is accused of committing a crime, that is not fair. So we see that in 1975, we see that again in 1979. So we're trying to, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I was 10 years old in 1979, so I was not fighting gender discrimination. So in 1980, President Jimmy Carter, there is a vacancy on the Supreme Court. I'm sorry, not on the Supreme Court. There's a vacancy in the Court of Appeals, the District of Columbia, and he appoints Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So we see them here shaking hands at a reception. So during her time on the Court of Appeals, she gains a reputation for building or finding consensus with those who are ideologically opposed to her. And that is important because that is something that really resonates with President Clinton. All right, so this is President Clinton and Ruth Bader Ginsburg at the nomination. But I want to tell you, before I go on to the next slide, I want to tell you about their meeting. So I mentioned that President Clinton invited Ruth Bader Ginsburg to the White House on a Sunday. And the invitation didn't come directly from him. There were lots of people in the middle. And one of those people, the gentleman named Bernie Nussbaum, who was a big fan of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and really pushing President Clinton to nominate her for several reasons. But he called Ruth Bader Ginsburg and said, you know, the president, he wants to meet with you on a Sunday. And she said, well, what should I wear? And Nussbaum said, well, President Clinton is playing golf on Sunday. So, you know, wear something nice, but casual, sporty. You know, he'll be coming straight from the golf course. Well, President Clinton's plans changed. And instead of coming from the golf course, he went to church on that Sunday. So Ruth was, mortified that she was dressed so casually. But she made a really good impression on President Clinton, and he decided to nominate her. And the nomination, a letter is sent to the Senate, and then they also did a public announcement in the Rose Garden. We have a YouTube page where you can watch the nomination ceremony, and you can hear Ruth Bader Ginsburg talk about her mother toward the end of her remarks. So President Clinton gave remarks, and then Ginsburg gave remarks. Now, here is what that letter to the Senate looks like. So it's very short. It's a very formal letter. I'm not sure who handwrote the date on it, or who typed the typed portion, but that's President Clinton's signature at the bottom, and then that is sent over to the Senate. And then we begin the process. Again, I don't know why I keep saying we, wasn't there. The process of prepping the candidate, the nominee, begins, and it is intense. Ruth Bader Ginsburg had to go to mock Senate hearings where groups of people, individuals played different senators who served on the Judiciary Committee at the time. So this is a document from our archives, from our records. And so this is a sheet for someone who is going to role play Senator William Cohen, right? He is a 52-year-old senator. He's been in Congress since 1972, so about 20 years. He is a Republican, but tends to have liberal views on social issues. Now, I didn't pop this part out because this was originally a student program, but I think number 5 is particularly interesting. Cohen has a tendency to make bizarre analogies. For instance, his only comment to the press regarding gays in the military was that he, quote, found it curious that an expression of one's sexual orientation could be regarded as behavior by the military, while the Constitution protects burning of American flags as free speech. So that is, I would go with that being a bizarre analogy. All right, so I'm getting some questions in the Q&A. Who else was in the running for the opening? So I mentioned that President Clinton looked at about 40 people, and that Secretary of the Interior, Bruce Babbitt, and Judge Stephen Breyer were, along with Judge Ginsburg, his top 3. In his autobiography, he talks about Mario Cuomo maybe being a candidate. He talks about some federal judges he knew from Arkansas potentially being a candidate, but he really focused in on those 3. Now, I have another question which is impossible for me to answer because you would have to ask Ruth Bader Ginsburg, why didn't she retire, allowing Obama to appoint someone that would have perhaps more similar views than her? And I don't know. I don't know why she tried to, I don't know why she decided to stay on the court. I don't have an answer to that. All right, we've got another question about Supreme Court justices serving for life, but why don't we circle back around to that? Because in addition to having people role play members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, those individuals were also making notes about her performance, right? And you can see here, they're calling it a mock trial, although technically it's mock Senate hearings. And they have some concerns, right? They're saying the process is quite slow. Cohen may tend to be a much faster interrogator than his colleagues. Moreover, Cohen will not need to make up for a poor performance during the Thomas hearings. That's going to come up in just a minute. RBG, on the other hand, is a very slow answerer. She pauses, takes deep breaths, and then answers, right? So imagine how nerve-wracking it would be for me if I knew on your evaluation for this Zoom webinar that you were going to critique my delivery. Right? I've already failed at screen sharing once, right? So can you imagine, it's bad enough that you're going to have to go before the Senate Judiciary Committee, but to have all of this pressure at these mock hearings. So it ends up being not that bad, right? So President Biden at the time is a senator, and he is the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So he is leading the hearings. So they interview her. She is very reluctant to answer questions in which she would need to share her opinion on issues that she might face on the Supreme Court. Right. So the idea is that a judge, Supreme Court justice, doesn't have a public opinion about things that they're going to hear. Right. So when they are hearing from plaintiffs, when they are hearing court cases that have risen to that high a level, it's important that they are viewing each case strictly on its merits and not on their own leaning. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg felt very strongly about that. Now, she was asked some questions that she didn't exactly answer. There's about like maybe 24 hours of hearings that you can watch on C-SPAN. If you get bored, have trouble falling asleep at night, you can go in and search on C-SPAN and watch her Senate hearings. There's one particular interaction where Biden asks her a question, Ruth Bader Ginsburg gives an answer, and Biden's response is, "That was a really good answer. You didn't answer the question I asked, but that was still a really good answer." So it ended up not being nearly as contentious as they anticipated. And so the the Senate Judiciary Committee does recommend that a full vote be taken in the Senate. So this is a great political cartoon that came out during the hearings. So you can see Ruth Bader Ginsburg is in her suit of armor with a big sword, right? And it's almost like a castle between her, the walls of a castle between her and the Senate Judiciary Committee. And they are saying, "Tell her we come in peace." right? She doesn't have to be so defensive. Now, I love this at the bottom, the little snarky comment. They don't really care to hear you, but they dearly love to hear themselves. So the cartoonist was definitely making a jab at the senators. Now, I haven't gone back to see who all was on the Judiciary Committee besides President Biden, but I definitely recognize center front, that is Ted Kennedy. So I'll have to go back and figure out who all the others are. So the confirmation went well. The roll call vote ended with 96 in favor, 3 opposed. If you know about the Senate, you know that there are 2 senators for every state, making 100 senators, and 96 plus 3 does not equal 100. There was a senator who declined to vote, so abstained from voting. Do not have the details on that. All right, so August 10th, 1993, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was sworn in to the Supreme Court. You see here, Chief Justice Rehnquist and President Clinton. And if I'm right, I believe that is Marty Ginsburg, who is holding the Bible for her swearing in. All right, we have a new question in the Q&A, and this is perfect timing. Do you think RBG's hearing went so well because the Clarence Thomas hearings were so controversial? Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? The senators who'd been on the Senate Judiciary Committee during the Thomas hearings, we read it in the description of Cohen, right? He doesn't have to make up for a poor performance. And I think it's significant that the controversy in the Thomas hearings, a lot of that came from the way that the senators treated Anita Hill. So to have a female Supreme Court Justice nominee, particularly, I just want you to look at how teeny tiny Ruth Bader Ginsburg is. Look at President Clinton. He's standing directly behind her. She only comes up to here, right? So imagine you're a senator and people did not care for the way you treated Anita Hill during the Thomas hearings. You're on the Senate Judiciary Committee and you're going to be questioning Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is a teeny tiny Jewish grandma, right? You may not want to be on C-SPAN really grilling her, right? And so that's kind of where that comes in with the "we come in peace." So she was sworn in. She became the second woman to be a Supreme Court justice. Sandra Day O'Connor retired. 2 additional women were appointed by President Obama. So Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor. And so at one point there were 3 women on the Supreme Court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was once asked when the number of women on the Supreme Court would be fair. When would it be fair and equitable? How many women would need to be on the Supreme Court for it to be fair? And she famously answered, yes, when there are 9. And people were taken aback by that. They were like, well, wouldn't it be fair with like half and half? She's like, no, nobody said it was unfair when there were 9 men. Nobody said that was unfair. Why would it be unfair if there were 9 women? All right. No, so there are currently, sorry, Patricia Baker. Yes, there is a 3rd woman on the Supreme Court now. So Amy Comey Bryant. Yes.
Amy
So
Comey Bryant. Yeah.
Yes. I always forget. I want it to be ABC, but it's ACB. Right. Right. So there have been 5 Supreme Court justices who were women. There have been, the max on the court has been 3, and there are currently 3. All right. So the tough question in the Q&A, I'm going to open it up now to Q&A. We are about quarter till the hour. I am going to skip this slide because I imagine that you don't care about teacher workshops or lesson plans and activities, but we do have those. And we looked at President Clinton's daily schedule for every day that he was in office. That is something that you can do on the Clinton Digital Library. You can look at the president's schedule. You can look at the First Lady's schedule. You can look at digital library exhibits. You can look at President Clinton's travel schedule. There's a lot of neat stuff on there. This is a program for students that you are probably not interested in, but you should know that the National Archives is focused on increasing civic literacy. And then here is my questions slide. It has both our website and my email address. You're welcome to email me with questions about the presentation. I'm glad to see that at least one of you has visited the Clinton Library in Little Rock. It is an awesome place to work. I get to talk to students and teachers about the government, about how our system of government works, using President Clinton as my primary example. We also have a Facebook page, an Instagram account, a Twitter account, and a YouTube page. So I mentioned on our YouTube page that you can see both the announcement of Ruth Bader Ginsburg as the nominee, and you can see the swearing in ceremony there as well. But you can also see all kinds of other videos from the Clinton administration, him giving speeches, signing legislation, his swearing in, the 1993 inauguration, the 1997 inauguration. So there's a lot of great stuff out there. Now, I do want to open the floor to questions, and I think we were going to stop the recording.
Yes, I can do that now, Kathleen. And for the sake of the recording, I'll thank you again. But I want to thank you now. A wonderful presentation as expected. And again, folks, look for an email from me later today with a link to, probably tomorrow actually, with a link to this recording, a link to a feedback survey, and more upcoming programs from presidential libraries. So let me stop the recording now. Thanks again.